We're going to talk this week about Chassidishe shechita. Now, what Chassidishe shechita means today and what Chassidishe shechita meant 250 years ago seems to be very different. I met someone a few days ago, and I told him I'm going to talk about Chassidishe shechita, so he sent me a video of a Chabad rabbi from somewhere in the world being asked, what's the meaning of Lubavitcher shechita? Why is Lubavitcher shechita so important? And the rabbi told him that it's obvious that Chassidishe shechita is about personal credentials. It's about making sure that the person who's the shechit in all his personal conduct is appropriate. And if learning Chassidus is what's mizakik a person on the highest level, so it's important to be someone who learns Chassidus. And if Chassidus of Chabad is the most important Chassidus, then it has to be someone who's orangutan in Chassidus of Chabad to be a Lubavitcher shechita. Now, I looked around a little, and I think that he's right. I think he's right. I think that Chassidishe shechita today really just means that you lead your life on the level of personal conduct that's acceptable in whatever Chassidishe court it is that you're participating in. Meaning, in Satmar it means one thing, in Lubavitch it means something else, in Belz it might mean a third thing, but it really is just a way of gauging the personal conduct of the shechit. Now, there's nothing wrong with it. That's the right thing. That's a good thing. L'mashal, the Rabbeinu Yoina in Shari Tshuva writes that to be a shechit, Rabbeinu Yoina says, you need to be a tremendous Yirei Shemayim. Someone who's not a Yirei Shemayim, he's not going to be careful. Now he's talking about purely technical. He's not talking about like Chassidishe shechita, but he says someone who's not going to be careful, is not going to check the knife properly, is not going to do the bedikas properly, and is going to end up, having shechitas that are going to lead people to eat treif. So certainly it is correct that a strict code of personal conduct is needed to establish who's allowed to be a shechit. There's nothing wrong with that. But Chassidishe shechita a long time ago meant something very different, and that's something that mamish faded away into the sands of time, the sands of history. It doesn't exist anymore. It's meaningless today. But I have a book at home that collected all the kolkeras and charamas that were put out against the Hasidim in the early years, and I just jotted down on a sticky note because I didn't want to bring the book here. In Brody in 1772. In Slutsk in 1781, in Moalev in 1787, in Shklov in 1797, in Minsk in 1797. These are all kolkeris that are very specifically, one of the bulletins in the kolkera is, it's asur to eat from Chassidishe shechita. The exact opposite. These are all kolkeris put up by Kehilas all over Ukraine and Poland and Litva, saying that it's asur to eat from Chassidishe shechita. Now, one of the most striking of them is from Reb Meshulam Igra. I'm sure that I've heard of Reb Meshulam Igra. He was the Rav in Pressburg before the Chassam Sofer. He's the one that the Chassam Sofer took over. Reb Meshulam Igra was a Rav in a small town in Ukraine called Tzimit or Tzimis, and he left because of the Chassidim. There was too many Chassidim there for his liking. The Kehila was becoming the Chassidish Kehila, so he left. And he was on his way to take the Shtetl in Pressburg. He made a stop in the city of Lvov, Lemberg. He stopped over there, and while he was there, he penned a sharp kolkera against Chassidim. In conjunction with the city of Lvov. He's like, by the way, I just had the craziest personal experience. Let me tell you what to stay away from, and I'm going to help you write it up over here in Lvov. And he penned it, and it's extremely sharp. And in there, Meshulam Igra writes that it's asur to eat from Chassidishe shechita. Now the reason I'm choosing him is just because he's the biggest known name on all these kolkeros. Most of them are just community activists, small-time rabbanim, not people that we know. Meshulam Igra is a well-known person. He wrote his own together in conjunction with the Bezdin of Lvov to ban Chassidishe shechita. So now, what is the Chassidishe shechita that's being banned that isn't just a symbol of personal attributes of being a good guy that would be a good thing? So to get to that, I need to just give a drop of background over here about shechita. In Hilchos shechita, there are 5 main psulim that can arise in a shechita. There's shehiyah, which means the shechita must be done always in a constant slicing back and forth motion. If you take a break from that slicing back and forth motion, the shechita could become treif, it could become invalidated. Now, what exactly is a shehiyah? Each one of these things is obviously a sugya farzich with many, many details and etc. But let's just say shehiyah is something that could be a problem in shechita. Then there's drasa, which means putting too much pressure. If you're not slicing, which is again similar to the not slicing, you're putting pressure down, that's a problem also. Then there's chalada, which is a little tricky what it means. Then there's ikur, which is also complicated what it means. And then there's hagrama, which means shechting in the wrong location. Meaning the neck of an animal has a specific location which is destined for shechita. A giraffe's neck, the very short neck of a giraffe, has none of that location, obviously. No, obviously a giraffe has the most location where you could shech. but the location of shechita is literally from the top of the neck of the animal right under the jawbone, 2 or 4 fingers worth of space under the jawbone until where the trachea meets the lungs. So on a cow, it's probably this. On a giraffe, it's 2 of these tables. It's a lot of space depending on the animal. On a chicken, it's smaller. So hagrama is another one. Now, the 2 that we're going to be discussing today are shehiyah, which means shechting, breaking the rhythm of shechita, and drasa, pressuring the animal and like just making a cut like that. Now, the reason those are negay is because those are the ones that impact the most what the knife has to look like. Now, just to give the background, the Gemara in Chulin and the Lamed Beis, it's a Mishnah. The Mishnah says, if you waited, meaning you stopped the slicing motion for the amount of time that it would take you to do shechita, then psula, the animal's puzzle. Now, what that is a big discussion, etc. The Mishnah later on, the Tublat earlier, says that hit is esarosh, meaning you hacked off the head, which is a drasa motion, which is like just a chopping motion. That's also going to be available if the animal's not kosher. So those 2 are psulim that are given by shechita, shia, and drasa. Now, those are the ones that make it to the Shulchan Aruch to define what a knife is supposed to look like. And I'll explain what I mean. A knife, when you take a shechita knife, so it can either be made out of like very thick, durable steel, like a centimeter thick, 2 centimeters thick, a real thick piece of steel. But the problem is when steel is very thick, you can't sharpen it that much. Meaning the thinner something is, the sharper you could get the end to be. So if I take a piece of steel that's thick like this, I can never get the point down to a sharp point. It's going to be sharp-ish, but the blade is like, it's a thick blade. The thick blade is very strong. It won't bend, it won't buckle, it won't get nicked on the skin. Meaning it's very durable. It has a lot of milus when it comes to shechita because it's durable, it's strong. That's called chalak. It's called straight. It presents as a very straight, strong line to cut on, and it's not going to be damaged during the shechita process. The second type of knife could be chad, super sharp. Now, in order to have a knife that's super sharp, it has to be a much thinner steel. The steel has to be whittled down to like a fraction of a centimeter, and then you could make the blade so razor sharp that it's going to just slice like nothing's there. Now, each one of these things has a drawback and has a maila and a chasaron. There's a benefit and a drawback. If you take a knife that's chalak, it's very strong. It has a strong, line to cut on. So it's not going to have a problem of drasa. You're never going to be able to just like pressure through because you need to saw to get it to cut. It requires the sawing motion to make the blade work. But mitzad sheni, if you need to saw for 2 minutes to get through the neck of a cow, you might take a break for a second or stop here or get tired and you can have a problem with shehiyah. So a knife that has a strong jawline, a strong knife, so that has a maila in regards to the drasa, but a chasaron in regards to the shehiyah. And vice versa. You take a knife that's chad, that's super sharp, so it has a maila in regards to drasa, in regards to shehiyah, because you take, what does it take? It takes a few seconds. It's not a big deal. You're not going to stop. But in regards to drasa, the idea of just pressuring through, it's a knife that's super sharp. You can literally just like do it and it's done. So it's a problem of drasa. Now, this trade-off between these 2 milas is mentioned in Shulchan Aruch. The Shulchan Aruch in Siman Yud Ches in Yeridea says as follows: Sakin chada shehushchas v'arei eina chalaka. A sakin that's very sharp, but it's not very strong. Elo magasa kemaga roisha shiboila shumistabach be'emtza. It has like kind of a dip in the middle, like it's a little bit wavy. Hoil ve'ein bepagam. Since it does not have any actual imperfection in the knife, in the surface of the cutting surface, shechtim bo, you're allowed to cut. Hagas says the Ramah. It's gray area as to what is considered too wavy, too not straight of a cutting line, so we don't cut with such a knife. But the Ikar din, it's kosher. That's Sivav. Siv Zayin continues and it says, Shakin Chepia Chalak ve'ene chada. It's the opposite. It's Pia Chalak. It's it's strong, but ve'ene chada, it's not sharp. Hoil ve'ein b'pegam, since it has no imperfection, sheichtim ba, you can shecht with it. And this is the important point. Even though you're slicing back and forth all day long, even though you're doing it's not that sharp. It's a pretty dull knife. It's very strong, so nothing's going to happen. So you're shechting again. Kosher even shechted kaliyim kuli, says the Mechaber. And on this, the Ramah doesn't argue. So now, based on this Shulchan Aruch, the way the Shulchan Aruch explains the trade-off of these 2, characteristics, components of a knife, the traditional knife in Europe, let's say in Ukraine, in the year, take out of a hat, 1650, would have been a pretty thick knife. Would have been a blade of metal, a piece of metal that was thick, like, a centimeter thick, and was sharpened to the best they could on the edge. It was sharp, but it wasn't razor sharp. And in order to shecht, let's say a gasa, you have to shecht a cow, You had to do some serious amount of cutting. But provided that you didn't take any breaks and you made a cutting motion, you were good to go. Now, came along the Chassidim, and they said, okay, it works. The Shulchan Aruch clearly says that it works. But Lamaisa, it's not a great knife. And there's a lot of risk. Shech, you could end up getting tired. You're going to get, it could be hard. You're going to do a shehiyah. And the sheikhtim in the town of Mezrich, during the Tkuf of the Maggid, and we'll talk about this in a second, invented a new knife. It was a sheikh who invented it, and the Mezrich Maggid liked it a lot, and started instituting they should use it. Now, what the sheikh had invented essentially was a knife that was razor sharp. Now, how does one do that? You take the metal, the whole metal is a thinner piece of metal, it's hammered out much thinner, and then you make a super, super sharp cutting surface, cutting edge on it, and it cuts mamash chick-chack, and there's no problem, and it works better. Now, this, is a reasonable innovation, meaning there's nothing crazy about this. I'm explaining, there's drawbacks of every knife, the Shulchan Aruch was aware of this. It's a reasonable innovation that the Chassidim in Mezrich decided to institute, that cutting surface should be much, much sharper, but it shouldn't be as thick. Now, just in regards to how this happened, so it's interesting. In the Chassidishe world, there's a few different legends that are told about the invention of this knife. There's a sefer called Kisvei of Yasha Shuv. It's all sorts of stories from the early Chassidim. It's a fascinating sefer. And in it he has a story that the Talmudis of Yaakov Yitzchak of Polanaya, probably is the right to say. It was a Talmud of the Baal Shem Tov, one of the earliest Talmidim of the Baal Shem Tov. The Talmudis, he wrote a sefer. When he heard that the Mezrich Maggid, one of his fellow Talmidim, instituted a new knife in Mezrich, he was upset. He said, "Are you talking to make a new knife? Can I get everybody?" And he was an old man, but he said, "You know what? I'm doing this." He put on his boots and his coat, got into his wagon, he drove down to Mezrich to protest. Now, I want to read you the language that Rabbi Ashishov writes, just because I wouldn't say this myself, but it's an interesting language. He writes, pardon me if I misquoted a drop. He writes, they told us who was, I think he says he was like an angry man, got into his wagon, he said, "You know what, I'm going to go fight with him." That's what he said. That's what he writes. The Talmudis was not a person who sat still and didn't do something when it bothered him. He said, "I'm going to get in there, I'm going to go fight with the Mezrich Maggid, I'm going to fix his wagon." So he goes down to Mezrich and he comes in, and before he even gets a chance to meet the Maggid, he comes to shul, he comes to Shachas, and he sees the Maggid in the front with his avodas, davening, and then after a 2-hour tefillah, the Maggid sits down to learn a little bit, and then he watches how the Maggid sits down to eat a little, and the Chassidim are coming, and by the time his appointment, he's ready to see the Maggid lunchtime, he says, he's a good guy. I'm not going to... That's how Rabbi Yashishov says the story. The Maggid's a good man. He obviously has a reason. I'm going to... It's nice. He said, "Hello, it's nice to see you," and he went back to Polanya. That's the story that's told, one version. Another version, interesting, another version that the Balatanya's brother in his tshuva brings down. Balatanya has a brother who wrote some tshuvas. In the tshuva he brings down a story that the Talmudis went, full of anger to change this minig, and he had his meeting with the Maggid, and the Maggid told him, "Listen, Herzachayim, when Unzer Grace Rebbe the Baal Shem Tov was alive, he was enough of a schos for the dar to be megan, that even if the knives weren't perfect, he wouldn't come to a shehiyah. The Klal, he's not going to, he's not going to let Klal Yisrael fall into Gehenim, and the tzaddik was megan that no one should eat treif, even though the knives were not so great." He says, but now that Unzer Grace Rebbe the Baal Shem Tov is gone, and there's no schos hatzalah for Hagana for the whole dar anymore, so now, less brera, I have to make tikkunim to make sure that the knives are better. And this answer, according to that version of the story, also satisfied the Talmudis. So there was some, dissension within the Chassidishe world when this happened, and whatever version you want to go with, the Talmudis went to confront the Maggid, but at the end of the day, he was either convinced by the Maggid's persona or by the Maggid's words that this is the proper, derech that the Chassidim should take, and slowly, Chassidim all over different kehillas started adopting this minig of shechting with the super sharp knives from the Mezrich shechtim, as opposed to the traditional shechita knives that were used by shechtim throughout. Now, I'll digress for 1 second. Just another fun story. To me, this just highlights how this spread throughout. It's later on, many years later, that Tzemach Tzedek, who's 50, 60 years later than this, is a story with the Tzemach Tzedek. There was a small kehillah of Chabatzkas who lived in the town, and they were mamish the minority. There was 15 sheikhtim. It was a big city with lots of sheikhtim, a lot of rabbanim, etc. They were a small minority, but they didn't want to eat from the shechita of the other sheikhtim who weren't using the Chassidishe knife. They called in the tshuva language, they're called sakinim melutashim. That's what they were called, the sakin melutish. In Yiddish, they were called a shlinge sakin, a shlinge chalif. They had different languages, whatever thing. So they they sent the messenger to the Rebbe, the Tzemach Tzedek, and they said, like, in the scale of things, where does this rate? Like, if we have to make concessions, because we're in a Litvish town, like, where do we make concessions? Could we eat from the Litvish shechita? And the Tzemach Tzedek told them, Ad Mesiras Nefesh. This thing of an Ad Mesiras Nefesh. So they were afraid, Lemaisa, of the Litvaks in the town. So what they did is, they didn't make a whole stink about it that they're not eating. They just stopped eating from the Litvish shechita, and they had a Chassidishe shechita who shechted with their knife. And there was like 10 different butchers, and nobody knew. Each butcher just assumed the Chassidishe Olam is by a different butcher this week, and it was no problem. He says one time that there was a shechtim conference, and all 10 shechtim get together, and they say, have you seen Yankel Magid by you anytime recently? He's like, no, by you, So where are they? And they dig a little, and they find that out they have their own shechet, and then they're furious. They go to the Rav. We have to put the head of this was Yankel Malamed. He was the head of the Chabad Kehil in the shul. We have to put Yankel Malamed and Chayrim. The Rav's masking 100%, as evidenced by these many Kulkaris that came out. And they sent a march outside Yankel Malamed's window, and they say, Yankel Malamed Amahuritz, Kim Aros, so we can put you in Chayrim properly. And it's all recorded. This story is all about them. So he says, come out so we can put you in Chayrim like a mensch. So he comes out and he says, the charge against me is that I'm an Amaretz, right? Fine, so I'll go with you to the Rav and we'll see who's the Amaretz. This is the story. So he sits down by the Rav and he said, what a mechutzif, he's going to challenge the Rav to a bechina off, a faher off, like it's not much a huge chutzpah, but he says, listen, you charge me that I'm Amaretz. He said, that's why I have no right, so let's do it. And the bechina that they gave them, and this is a crazy bechina, is someone would go to the shelf, pull off any mesechta from the shelf, turn to the back, choose any marsha, anywhere in the mesechta, and the person who was being questioned had to explain what the taisvis and the sugya that this marsha was referencing, or what the sugya, what this marsha was coming to do. And they did round for round, and the Rav lost. And the Yankel Malamed was vindicated that he's not an Amaretz. So the Rav said, if you're not an Amaretz, so what's the shot you did this maisa, this strange maisa of making, this new type of knife? He says, Valunzer Heiliger Rebbe, the Tzemach Tzedek gesagt, that it's, ad charmer, you have to go, ad Mesiras Nefesh for this. And they agreed to disagree, and everyone went their merry way, is how the story is told. But what it highlights to you is what a fight this was. Meaning, at the time, this was a tremendous milchama. Every city that it arrived to, it led to like a huge fight back and forth between the kehillah that was there and the kehillah that was, growing to be there. And the reason really is because shechita knives is something that's very, very like, I'll say like this, like hechsherim batzim, what we have a hechsher in all food, is batzim a new phenomenon. Hechsherim are not around forever. Hechsherim is a relatively new thing. Yeah, there's a famous takana from the Vadar Baratzas from a few hundred years ago that says something about needing a Rav Machsher, but trust me, it didn't mean in the OU. It didn't mean like institutionalized hechsherim like this. Hechsherim as they are today is a relatively new invention. But what's not a new invention is needing a Rav Machsher on shechita. Shechita, Medina the Gemara in Chulun Dafid Ches, says that shechita needs the Rav. Now, the shechita meaning you have to bring your knife to show to the Rav. If you don't bring your knife to show to the Rav, then you can't shecht with it. The Gemara says, Chayev kol tabach l'harei sakinai l'chacham ha'ir kaidim kol shechita v'shechita. That's the din. You have to show your knife to the chacham ha'ir before every shechita. Now, l'maisa, bizmanenu, and even bizmanehem, that halacha was already changed, because as shechita became like more industrialized, and you had like a shlachtais with 10 shechtim there, so they didn't make the shechet go each time with his knife to the Rav. It would be more like once a month, the shechet would go to the Rav for a bechina and a knife checkup. And in the shlachtais itself, there'd be spot checks. The Rav would come in, or there'd be a shechet, there'd be a baidik, or there'd be whatever. Meaning, the only thing in the Alta Haim that had a hechsher, that really had a Rav HaMachsher with like a mashkiach tmidi, was shechita. So shechita was the thing where if you chep it with it, your mom was chepping with like the Rav's whole power, the power of the kehillah. It was the only thing that had a hechsher properly. Now, I saw the Aruch HaShulchan, just to show you how quickly this machlek is faded away. The Aruch HaShulchan in Siman Yud Ches, in Ois Yud Zayin, he says as follows: the emes, the Aruch HaShulchan died, if I remember correctly, in maybe 1905, and I'm going to take a guess, 1905, 1910, not later than that. That's when the Aruch HaShulchan died. So when he was a kid, the Aruch HaShulchan lived till about 80, Pachas Yoser. So we're talking 1830 is when he was a child. So the Aruch HaShulchan writes, "Emes shebial duseinu." When I was a child, he says, "Shamanu v'chein re'inu." Bisvarim, we saw and we heard in Svarim and from people, shebe'erach shnei deiris mikaidim, that be'erach 2 deiris before I was a child, meaning so late 1700s, early Chassidim, hoysem machlekes gedoyle ben Chachmei Yisrael. There was a tremendous machlekes between the Chachmei Yisrael, but dvar hamadas hasakin, exactly how to stella in the knife for shechita. She'elu hayim amidin es chod hasakin dak v'chad, These would make it sharp and thin. And the others would make it a little thicker, but a very strong straight line to cut on. And each side, mamish, stood on their words that this is the main way, it has to be like this. Anything that's not like this is no good. And there were those who said even who would stop eating meat from, the other ones shechita. He says, the Emes Medina says, the Aruch HaShulchan, writing like post-op, years later, both of them are kosher. Not one of them is treif, both of them are kosher. It was a kehila fight, it wasn't a kashrus fight. Ha'amnam, he says, today it's all standardized, there is no chilik anymore. Today everyone's knives are the same in regards to chalika and to chad. Now the reason what really happened that put this fight to rest was better steel became available. When the Industrial Revolution came, they started importing steel from England in the early 1800s, and it was a steel that was like a composite steel where you could make it thin and strong, and today a knife could be razor sharp and super thin, and it could have all the miles. There is no reason anymore. The whole fight went away. They called it, you see it in the Chuvas, it's called the English something. The English is something. It's really, you could look it up on Google. It's a blend. It's an English blend of steel that was popular, in the early 1800s, in the middle of the Industrial Revolution, and it was used for machines, and it was used for all sorts of cutting surfaces, and of course it was used for shechita knives also, and it resolved this whole issue, minei obey. It made the fight not a fight. But b'cholefen, this was a thing. Now, I just want to, for some reason, this became looked at as lebabit shechita. This knife, like the sharp knife, sakinim ulutashim, became looked at as Lubavitch shechita, not because it was a Lubavitch thing, but because Lubavitch, the Balatanya, wrote a lot of letters about it. And one of them, I was going to read his truth, but I'll read you one it's a very fascinating letter. The Balatanya, in Igeris Balatanya B'nei Deiri, it's called the Sefer, they have a letter there that the Balatanya wrote to the Kehila Valozhin. To Rav Chaim Volozhin's Kehila. I take it back, he wrote to Vilna, to the Kehila of Vilna, to defend himself from the attacks that the Litvaks are making on him. If you look at that book, the Igeris Balatanya B'nei Deiri, you'll see Balatanya was one of the only rebbes who felt the need to respond in detail to every critique the Litvaks had on him, and the Chassidim responded to. So he writes a letter to the Kehila in Vilna, where he writes as follows. He says, 2 weeks ago, I was in Shklov, Ba'asifas HaMedina, Hashem Yirachem, Ubeboyi B'erev Shabbos, I found Mechtavam, your Kol Kaira, the Karisi V'Shanisi V'Shilashti. I read it once, I read it twice, I read it 3 times. I made every diik, the Baltani knew how to learn. I made every diik that you can make in this Igeris to see what you tainas on me. Still don't understand, you're accusing me, we don't have the letter that he's responding to, because you're accusing me and my people of making mechshailas, of making stumbling blocks for your kila. I still don't understand how. The Medinas Ukraino, Poland Katan, Upadolia, Reva Medilas Valin, Oichlin Misakinim Ulutash. He says, I don't understand what your problem is that in all these areas our knife caught on. This letter is lahedi about the knives. He says, I don't know what mechshel you're talking about, that I'm being machshilam, that my knife caught on, that our knife caught on there. He says, V'gam bedubna rabasi, she'ena me'anash klal u'klal. He says, even in Dubna, the big city of Dubna, with the Dubna Magid from, which are not Chassidim b'chal, they're your people, he says. These are not my people. V'chein be'Ostra, v'Kremenitz, v'Lutsk, v'Sharki, l'Skadela, she'ena me'anash klal. They're not our people, and they eat from these knives also. So I don't know what you want from me, he says. I don't know what the grace of mechshel is. There are plenty of Litvish akilas that eat from this knife also, he says. V'gam ba'artz ha'kodesh. Rabbi Me'asvardim, even Eretz Yisrael, and the Svardim from this. Now, he's rather referring to, there's a tshuva from Rabbi Yoner Navon, who's I don't know, must have died in, 1750. He was a Rebbe of the Chida, like a contemporary of the Arachaim HaKadosh, a Rebbe of the Chida, a long time ago, who has a tshuva encouraging that the knives should be better, sharp, instead of thin. So he says, Gam Asvardim and Eretz Yisrael, meaning he knows about this. V'chalilu l'hoitzi dibas michshel avon al riv v'yisal Yisrael, shal kol hashmu zois he says, like, how could you bring out such a rumor on us that we machshel people haytachin? And now this is the punchline, and this is what's great about this tshuva. He says as follows. He says, "V'hine b'yois harava goyin marach niriyar avdak tekilas valozhin." He says, when I met Rav Chaim Volozhin b'medinaseinu b'shnas taf kuf samach gimel, when they both had to go to the Russian government to petition for something in the year, 1803. He met in 1803. He says, I met Rav Chaim Volozhin in Russia. Shamu mipiv kam negida medinasenu she'ena me'anash klal uklal shamu b'shem Rabbi Amovak Hagoyin Chassid Mivilna Zal. We heard from him that he said in the name of the Goyin she'ein shum iser b'shchita sakinim ulutashim. Says the Goyin, who had a problem with Chassidim. The Baal Tanya was aware that many other letters is in regards to dealing with the Goyin Tanya. So incidentally, whenever the Baal Tanya writes about the Goyin, he writes about him with the highest of their cheretz and respect. But he addresses all the points. He says, we met Rav Chaim Volozhin, who told us in the name of the Goyin, she'ein shum iser b'shchita sakinim ulutashim. That there's no iser, like the Aruch Shulchan says, it's not a halacha problem. It's a community problem. It's a kehila problem. It's a kehila fight. This is not a halacha problem. Al pi adin ashani b'gemara b'paiskim. Rakim yetzi yisem mipivzal eni ela misham harchaka me'hanash. And this is a great line. Rav Chaim Volozhin told him, if you're going to hear that the Goyin aser shechita with sakinim ulutashim with Chassidishe knives, it's because he wanted to eradicate Chassidim. It has nothing to do with the knives. The Goyin didn't think knives. This is all in the letter. None of this is me. Says the Baal Tanya writes that Rav Chaim Volozhin told us if the Goyin was against it, he was against it because he was against you, not because he was against the knives themselves. This is what he writes. The Baal Tanya writes like the rest of the Archakis and Gzeris that were unfortunately Kiyatzer Kishkagum Pnei Ashalat B'Shnas Taf Kof Lamed Beis 1772. When the Goyin wrote Kalkairis and signed the Kalkairis against Chassidim, Sheimin Amardim. Okay, he continues now, and whatever. And then he continues that a person has to be able to make down a mistake, and then he goes on. He explains the whole background of Sakinim Ulutashim, where it came from, what problem it's coming to fix, and in the Chuvas in the back of the Baal Tanya, in Chuva Zayin and Chuva Yud and Chuva Lamed Zayin, I think, like a few places, Baal Tanya explains these knives, but then he ends off the Chuva, this letter over here, with something beautiful, which is different than what we're finding in Talmud. He says, he says, Lachtem Ulasayim B'Shalom. At the end of the day, I want to end off in peace over here, Ke'ani Shalom, because HaKadosh Baruch Hu Shalom. He says, V'nachon yeh libam hatar, batuach kashek eis. He says, Lo yisayre shum riv umadin ve'anash b'machanechem hatar. I'm not going to cause any fight between the Anash who live in your Kehillah in Vilna and your people. Like it used to be done in the days before this. We're not fighting, he says, and if you could eat from your shechita, I'm going to say that my Anash could eat from the shechita. So not like the Tzemach Tzedek told in this apocryphal story that, I don't know, the source is a little bit suspect, but the Tzemach Tzedek said that it's, Adi Harag Val Yavar. The Baal Tanya, in the letter that we have from him, very clearly writes that he, after justifying the whole thing and writing that the tainus against it, mitzad halacha, are weak tainus, not a real taina, he ends off ani shalom, shmoi shalom, and mela, no fights, and everyone can eat from everybody. That's how the Baal Tanya ends off. Now, Lemaisa, this whole fight, it was like one of the strongest fights that Hasidim and Litvaks had, because like I'm explaining, shechita was the fulcrum of a community, meaning we're a community with kevei, its policies. Today it's schools. Who gets into schools or whatever, right? So we're a community like enforces all its whatever it thinks are mamish its rules, or let's say schools now. So there was shechita. It was like you couldn't be a shechita, you couldn't be involved if you didn't stim with whatever all sorts of rules. Whether you thought they were serious, they were narishkeit, they were real, they were fake. If you didn't stell to the rules of a community, the shechita is where they'd get you. That's where they'd ban you. So when Chassidim came and they undermined the shechita and all these kilos, it led to like these tremendous fights. And the advent of alternate steel made this fight disappear so far into the background that nobody today even knows about Sakinim Ulutashim. It doesn't exist anymore. Hagam, I'll end with this. I did find in a letter from Chabad Bachrim in Taimchei Tmimim, who were learning in Shanghai, right? The Ilm knows that Shanghai, so let's say when we remember Mir Yeshiva went to Shanghai, but really it was, let's say, 70% Mir, 20% Chabad, 10% Chachmei Lublin. It was like, what is it? No. So there was a few like little kvutzas that were there. So there was a sizable Chabad, contingent over there in Shanghai. And from Shanghai, some of the Chabad Brachim sent letters to the Riyats, who was living in New York already at the time, asking to send them, along with money and warm sacks and food, if he could also send them Sakinim Ulutashim. Could he send us, Chabatska knives? Now, l'chayra, that's not a real thing. They just meant they couldn't get good knives there. Meaning they didn't have access to good shechita knives, and they were asking for good shechita knives if he could send them. Because at that point, in 1942 or 1943 or whatever it was, this fight already had faded into distance. It didn't really exist anymore. But this was a big fight at some point. Now, next week we'll continue shechita. One more piece of that internal shechita fights. But I think in Mitzvah Hashem, on Thursday, Thanksgiving, for whoever is not at work, we're going to have a Thanksgiving learning event, and we'll be joined by Rabbi Tepler. and we'll talk about turkey. I'll talk about the kashrus of turkey, and he'll talk about eating turkey. But huh?
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.